For this next step of the project, you're going to need your piece of styrofoam. You're going to need some markers, just regular, not Sharpies, not permanent markers. They need to be just regular washable markers. You will need some paper that is the same size as your piece of styrofoam, and you will need probably several sheets of that paper. You're going to need some clean water, a sponge, and a paper towel. I won't need the sponge or the water right now. I can go ahead and drop my sponge into the water so it can start soaking, but I'm not going to need that quite yet. The first thing I'm going to work with are my markers, and I'm actually just going to color right onto the styrofoam. Now, as I color onto the styrofoam, you may be kind of looking at it thinking, well, I'm not really seeing much color, and that's okay. That you will be able to see that color soon. What I'm trying to do is color inside of where I made all of my lines. I don't want to get any color down into those grooves of my line. I just want to color in the shapes that I created through my drawing. So I'm just working on coloring this in. My flower could be realistic colors. It could be imaginary colors. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to be able to do this more than one time also, so I could do completely different colors next time. Okay, the brighter the color, you'll like this one. Yeah, you'll be able to see this one a little bit more because it's a brighter color than that first color. And I'm just going to work on coloring all around. One thing to pay attention to is this will smear because the way the styrofoam is, it's not going to allow that marker to dry as much on its surface. So if you like rub your hand over it or something, it'll smear on you. So just, you know, turn your styrofoam. Don't try to work like with your hand on top of places that you've already colored. And your goal here is just to color in all of the different shapes that you drew onto that piece of styrofoam. Once you've filled your whole piece of styrofoam with marker, and really the more you fill it, the cooler this is. The kind of other cool thing about this is, like, if I didn't have time to finish coloring it right now, because I'm using washable markers, as long as I put it somewhere where it won't get like smashed or smeared, I can set this to the side and come back to it later. So if you don't have time to finish, you can just do like a little bit at a time. But I'm ready to move on. So I'm just going to take this, and for the moment, I don't want to get anything on it. So I'm just going to set it off to the side, and I'm going to grab a sheet of my paper. Now this, out of this entire project, is the trickiest part. If we were to take this and think of it again like a stamp, where you've added all this ink, if I were to turn this over and stamp this on this paper, nothing would really happen. There's just not enough ink and enough color on this to transfer onto a dry piece of paper. So we kind of have to encourage that along. And the way we're going to do that is by getting this paper wet, but this is the trickiest part to do right. You don't want your paper to be too wet because then it won't work. It'll just turn into a big puddle of color. But you don't want it to be too dry because then again, it also just won't work. So I'm going to take my sponge. It's fully saturated, okay, and I'm just going to squeeze it out so that it's now just a damp sponge. It's not a drippy sponge. And I'm going to go across my paper with my sponge this way, and I'm going to go across my paper with my sponge this way. I'm looking for my paper to be shiny without being puddly, okay? And if your paper kind of curls on you, you can sort of gently encourage it to not curl. And now you do have to work kind of quickly because I don't want that water to dry anymore. I'm going to take my piece of styrofoam and I'm carefully holding it by the edges, and I'm going to do my best as I can to line it up with my paper. Now, if I get a little bit off, it's not that big of a deal. I just want it to be pretty close. And then I'm just going to take my hand, and I don't want it to slide around. I'm holding it really still with one hand while I rub it with my other hand, okay? And then I'm going to switch. I'm going to hold it still with this hand, and I'm going to rub it with this hand all around, okay? I'm rubbing all the parts of my styrofoam. I'm not just using one finger because then that's not going to do a good transfer. You really want to use like your whole hand, but if you try to use two hands at one time and speed it up, you're probably going to end up moving it where you don't want it to go. So I'm going to make sure I got all my edges all the way around. And then when I peel my styrofoam up, what happens is all that beautiful marker that I colored onto this styrofoam will transfer onto my paper, and it's much more vibrant and bright than it was on here. Now, a couple things that I'm noticing, it did a really kind of cool job up here of transferring. It even did a pretty cool job right here. It didn't transfer quite as much right here. My paper must have been a little bit more dry, but I really like this texture that was created here where I can see all kind of those dots of the markers. It didn't do a great job transferring down here. So what that's telling me is that my paper probably just wasn't quite wet enough. But here's the cool thing with this project. I'm not done. I don't have to just do this one and then move on and never ever look at this project again. I can do this again. So this is a kind of printmaking where you've made a stamp and you're just going to keep printing your stamp. I'm going to take this one and set it to the side. And while I still have this marker on here, I'm going to try to print it again and see what happens. Now, because I noticed this time that my paper was maybe a little bit too dry, I'm going to try to get it a little bit more wet this time. Not too wet, of course, just a little bit more wet all the way around. And I'm going to try again to see how this goes. Now, you might need like a helping hand to help hold your paper flat as you're lining your styrofoam up. But again, if it doesn't line up perfectly, it's not that big of a deal. And I'm going to just hold it still with one hand. I'm going to rub with my other hand to really work on that transfer, hopefully getting all of that marker, or as much of that marker as possible, transferred. And then I'm going to peel it off again. And now I have two marker prints of the same color scheme. You can see one's a little bit brighter than the other. But again, here's the cool thing. I don't have to be done. I can take these and I can put them somewhere safe to dry. I kind of dry my work surface off a little bit. And then I can take the same sponge, and not sopping wet, just a little bit wet. I can clean my styrofoam off using my sponge. I have to be gentle with it because I don't want to like break it or anything. And then take a paper towel and just gently dry it off. And then I can do it again. And I can make completely different colors this time. Maybe instead of a pink flower, I want an orange flower. Or maybe I want a black flower or a purple flower or orange flower. Maybe instead of my leaves being green, maybe I want my leaves to be pink and my flower to be green. I can do it completely differently than I did the first time. And then I can stamp it again onto a new piece of paper. And in the end, I could end up with dozens and dozens of this really cool print of this stamp that I've made from this one piece of styrofoam, and I could end up with like tons of pieces of artwork. And if one of them doesn't turn out, like this one's not amazing, it's fine. I don't have to keep this one because I can just do it again. So if you have one that doesn't work so well, it's just not that big of a deal because you can try again. All right, I hope you enjoy this printmaking project.